The meeting of the Tahoe Forest Hospital Board of Directors is now called to order. Martina, can you do the roll call?
Sure. Director Brown? I'm here. Director Shamblin?
Present.
Director Barnett?
Present.
Director McGarry?
Here.
Director Wong?
Here. Are there any deletions or corrections to the posted agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on. I'm going to sort of switch this around a little bit because of some time schedule conflicts. We're going to stay in open session, and our Director of Facilities, Dylan Crosby, is going to give us the emergency operation plan update. Then we'll go into audience input for closed and go into closed session, okay? So Dylan, if you want to go ahead with your presentation, that would be great.
Yeah, perfect. So I don't have any visual presentation, but just oral communication here. So we had a discussion at the February board meeting in regards to our emergency operations plan during the consent. So that's policy AEOC 17. Our discussion was primarily around the management of media during disaster events. So we have gone and made some updates to the EOP, and I really just wanted to have the dialogue and close the circle that we heard you, and we have made said updates. So just referencing kind of that specific section, we did update the policy and tie it back to our media communications policy, which is APR 04. This policy really reflects who in the organization is allowed to speak to the media. And in just brief summary, that's our CEO, COO, CNO, the House Supervisor, Incident Commander, our Public Information Officer, Director of Marketing and Communications, and then the Executive Director of Governance and Business Development. We also have references in this section to the California Penal Code, specifically section 409.5, which is the authorized and the allowance of authorized and credentialed media to be given unrestricted access to disaster sites, unless it's reasonably determined that such unrestricted access would interfere emergency operations. So really just trying to provide that education and resource to our incident commander. We've assigned that our security branch director will direct security as well as other necessary staff to guide the media as well as oversee the media and just provide regular updates. Now that's not updates in regards to the disaster explicitly, but just more time, right? Hey, we'll provide an update at 9 a.m. per se, or just that regular updates and communications. And then we also went and made recommendations for media staging locations. So we thought pretty hard about this. Very difficult to really have an internal media staging relation just because the plethora of disasters that we have and the operations that we're pursuing, it's really difficult to set aside a space internally. So our recommendations were fully external. In addition to that, you know, this policy really is supposed to be the tool and resource at a high level for all the health system's potential disasters and adequate planning. So we have on-campus recommendations as well as off-campus recommendations. Our first recommendation we're referring to is the human resource parking lot. So essentially just this parking and staging area outside of the main hospital, primarily not to interfere with emergency access, which is primarily on Lavon. Secondary recommendation is the Gateway East parking lot. So that's one of our more recent acquisitions down the eastern side of campus. And then third recommendation is Pioneer Center. So in addition to that, this plan references many more specific plans, such as we have a specific plan and policy for our power outages, right? So within those circumstances, we're providing additional recommendations within those specific plans to approach those specific disasters. We also are I'd say we're rather completed with an emergency evacuation plan in regards to wildfire as well as another necessity. We had this dialogue with our community partners and actually had a tabletop exercise with our community partners last Friday. So that was the town, CHP, local police, North Tahoe Fire District, as well as the local Truckee Fire District here as well. So we kind of went over this plan and seen what additional resources that we can have. And then just some other references to assist the incident commander in the management, which is law enforcement can be contacted. We have various connection and communication points that we can work with them. And then as well as the recommendation to have security or other staff, escort staff in and out of the facility just to protect our staff from the media during these type of events. So that's kind of the work we've done to date to really bolster this. Again, we'll still pursue that and make sure it's an item in our disaster-specific plans. And that's what I have. I'd be happy to take any questions or further recommendations from the board.
Who is the incident commander, and does that vary?
It varies, yeah. So our hospital incident command system is set up to delegate the incident commander to based on the disaster and who's available. So it's very flexible. We define a role rather than a person. Yeah.
Dylan, thank you for getting onto this so quickly. This all came, as you know, out of the conference in San Antonio where the CEO of Uvalde Hospital spoke. And somebody had further conversations with him beyond the presentation. Do you recall, Alice, who that might have been? It might have been Ted.
I think it was Ted, yeah.
I think Ted did speak to him quite a bit.
And I think there were going to be some follow-up conversations coming out of his learnings, not just around the media, but other things that happened along the way. I think part of the problem was also having a storage facility, for lack of a better word, a morgue.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing that up, and I owe Ted a thank you for this as well. So Ted was very integral in helping us set up this practice, as well as will be in the future, because that's our primary resource for media-related issues.
And the CEO of Uvalde was a wonderful resource.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bob, do you have any comments on the emergency operation plan update?
No, I think it's good that we did it because just read the newspapers, you can see what a divergence of things are happening to communities.
Yeah.
So, we pray it doesn't happen to our community, but we have to be ready.
Michael, anything from you?
No.
And then the other question I have is, you mentioned the security officer. Is that the same as the incident commander, or, so where do we find the security officer?
Yeah, great question. So in that hospital incident command system, there's specified roles. A security director is one of those roles. And very similar to that incident commander, it's really based on the disaster as well as the resources available at the time. So typically in a disaster, when a disaster unfolds during normal business hours, you're going to see somebody as the C-suite kind of take initial control of the situation and then delegate that incident command as they see fit. In an after-hours event, that's done with the nursing supervisor in conjunction with the C-suite to really get the ball rolling. And then once that incident commander selected one of their first roles, and we have very structured sheets and ways to do this, they start delegating those roles. So security director is one of those primary roles. We also have logistics, operations, planning, finance, etc.
I was just wondering if it had to do anything with the security contract that we have with those security people that are here 24 hours a day.
Oh, great question. Yeah, so they come in as a resource as part of our disaster resource list, another thing we do upon the inception of a disaster. And then that becomes a resource under the security branch that really starts being directed and utilized as we see fit. And we do a ton of staff training. We actually did a staff training, I want to say 2 weeks ago on our hospital incident command system. We had a ton of attendees. We packed this room pretty good. And we did some tabletop exercises. And we always rotate those roles and responsibilities too. So there's various people throughout the organization who have in tabletop exercises held different realms. So I've participated in many of these exercises. I've held the incident commander role, the security role, the operations role prior. So there are quite a bit of staff that are very familiar with the process and the roles assigned.
Is anybody in the hospital armed?
No,
No. You rely strictly on the police department for that,
correct.
or the sheriff,
Yes,
or both?
all willing and able. Yeah.
Quick wit and a sharp tongue, that's all you're armed with, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Okay, any other questions? Any questions from our audience? Okay, well, thank you so much, Dylan, for that, and we hope that we won't have to use it very often, but now we know where to find that information, so thank you again for that presentation.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, so we're going back to closed session at this time to, we're going to go into closed session, but first, we'll have legal counsel tell us what items we're going to be discussing during closed session.
Yes, thank you, Chair Wong. There's actually two closed sessions this evening, but our first closed session, item 6, entails conference with legal counsel regarding initiation of litigation, one potential case, approval of the closed session minutes from March 23rd, and a timed item at 5:30, which is the medical staff credentialing.
Okay. Does our audience have any comments about the posted closed agenda? Because at this time, it would be your opportunity to give a 3-minute question or comment on the closed session agenda. Okay, so seeing none or hearing none, we'll close that.
We have no Zoom this evening, is that correct?
No, we're not going to be doing Zoom at all.
Okay.
Okay. So with that, we'll go into closed session at this time. And our first item And if General Counsel could please read us out of closed session.
Yes, thank you, Chair Wong. There were 3 matters considered in closed session. The first, conference with legal counsel, there was no reportable action. The approval of the closed session minutes from May 23rd were approved on a 5-0 vote, and the recommended medical staff credentialing decisions were also approved on a 5-0 vote.
Thank you. Are there any deletions, corrections, or any other adjustments to the agenda? Okay, hearing none or seeing none, we'll move on to audience input, and this is the opportunity for our audience to make any comments on things not on the agenda. And, okay, I'll go through the rules, and I'm sure you know them well. But again, if you'll come to our lectern and give your name, and you have 3 minutes to present your information to the board. And you know that we cannot discuss it because it wasn't agendized, and she's shaking her head. So could you please step to our lectern?
Great, thank you. And I apologize, I did not submit in writing ahead of time, so I have these to give to your clerk when I'm done. But my name's Jen Calloway. I'm the town manager for the town of Truckee. And I just wanted to come and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. We're all aware there's been a lot of conversation about the town's general plan process and the hospital's master plan process. And I'm not here to go back to the past and try to understand what's happened. I've said this in our council meetings, there's clearly been a disconnect, and we've had a breakdown, and we acknowledge that. Less focused on how that happened and more on how we're going to move forward. So we know we have a couple solutions. Some of which, or at least one of which, we've talked to the hospital team about. First, we think maybe forming a hospital master plan subcommittee where we have town staff, hospital staff, a board representative, and a council representative working together towards solutions. We think that can provide some transparency and some cooperation and see a different lens from the electeds' viewpoints during those discussions is a possible path forward if you'd be interested in that. We'd like to co-fund a facilitator or a third-party planning group that can come in and work for both of our agencies and try to move us towards solutions. As this process moves forward, we continue to advocate for and think that your fastest path forward is outside of the general plan because we are at the stage that we are at today. And so we haven't changed that position, but we want to face forward. We want to move forward with you in partnership, in collaboration, and find solutions. That's in the best interest of all of our joint constituents in the community. I want to imply it's not an easy process. There's going to be challenging conversations. We have to have a community process for that, but we want to work with you and find solutions. We've heard the sense of urgency on your part, and we recognize that, and we want to cooperate with you. So that's really all I had to say today. I have that in writing that I'll give to your clerk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, we hope that our conversations with the town will continue and have a positive outcome. Any other comments from our audience?
Hi there, my name is Megan. It's really nice to see all of you in person. First
Yeah.
time. Most of some of the videos great. I was hoping to use this time to first, again, urge the hospital to join the Climate Transformation Alliance. There are some really great collaborations happening in that group, and I think the hospital would benefit tremendously from becoming a part of it. And second, in light of the hospital's master plan and desire to expand facilities, I wanted to share, if you're not already aware, that CMS has recently issued a waiver that allows renewable energy powered microgrids to provide backup power to healthcare facilities. And prior to this announcement, the agency had required most healthcare organizations to use fossil fuel generators for backup power, but microgrid installations at healthcare facilities across California have demonstrated that this technology is really quite effective. And also the 2023 edition of the National Electric Code now permits the use of microgrids in healthcare facilities as well. So there seems to be a groundswell of really exciting changes happening in this area. And the last point I'll make is just that the Inflation Reduction Act has all kinds of funding mechanisms available for these types of projects, including direct pay provision, which could help the hospital become more resilient at a lower cost. And I'd be happy to provide you with more information on this topic too, if that would be helpful. That's all. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Meg, and thank you for that additional information about funding. Are there any other comments from our audience? Okay, hearing none, we'll close public comment, and we'll go to input from our Employees Association. And there are none, so we'll close that. So now we have some acknowledgements. And do you want to go ahead and start off? We're going to just kind of change the order because we wound up having to split them up. So Michael's going to start with his.
I'll take the first two. One acknowledgement, National Volunteer Week, which was from April 16th to the 22nd. National Volunteer Week is celebrated annually during the third week of April. The week-long celebration is about placing a spotlight on those whose invaluable seeds of kindness through volunteering are bettering the community and our world in general. This significant celebration, which was established in 1974, provides the perfect opportunity to say thank you. So for Tahoe Forest Health System volunteers who so graciously give of your time and talents, service is at the heart of what you do. To the volunteers who have staffed the gift shop, answered the phone, worked hand in hand with the health system staff, provided support to a patient or family in need, and to all our volunteers for their unending support, thank you. Second acknowledgement is National Hospital Week. Recognizing the care and support provided by over 6,000 hospitals across the country, National Hospital Week is celebrated this year from May 8th through 14th. Each year, this celebration recognizes the dedicated personnel who provide quality care every day. The work can be stressful, but it is also extremely satisfying. The care they provide brings life into the world, saves lives, and eases our exits from the world. They answer our questions, ease our pain, and support our recovery. National Hospital Week recognizes hospital workers in every hospital setting, including long-term, short-term, children's hospitals, Veterans Health Administration, and psychiatric hospitals. During National Hospital Week, the dedicated personnel are at the center of the celebration.
Thank you. And I have the fortune to tell you about our Valued Award recipients for the first quarter. And you might remember that our values are stood by Quest, Quality, Understanding, Excellence, and Stewardship. And our first awardee received the quality for holding herself to the highest standard, committed to continuous improvement, as having personal integrity in all she does, and that would have been Jennifer Heckendorf from the Children's Center. Then for understanding, this employee is aware of the concerns of others, demonstrates compassion, respecting and caring for his coworkers as he interacts with them. And the Understanding Value Award went to Luis Jacinto of the Orthopedic Clinic. The individual does things right the first time, every time, and is accountable and responsible, received the Excellence Value Award, and that was Yesenia Galvez of the Access Center. Our next awardee is recognized for being a community partner, responsible for safeguarding care and managing of the health system's resources, which being innovative and being quality care. And that stewardship award went to Jennifer Brixey, a respiratory therapist. Teamwork is the next value, and that employee looks out for those she works with, finds ways to support others in the job that they do. And that award went to Alyssa Ackerman from the Cancer Center. And of course, we can't forget our leaders, who were also recognized for demonstrating and holding themselves accountable for the values of Tahoe Forest Hospital District. Our manager award went to Nicole Becker of the Med-Surg unit, and the physician is Dr. Aaron Ullman of the Family Medicine. And congratulations to those award winners, and thank you for your commitment to the values of our district. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't do the next acknowledgement. So In 1974, the International Council of Nurses wished to acknowledge the contributions of nurses and call attention to the work they did, so they established May 12th as International Nurses Day. And you might know that May 12th is Florence Nightingale's birthday.
Yeah.
The celebration was extended to a week a few years later, and National Nurses Week was officially born in 1994 with a declaration from President Richard Nixon. The theme of this year's Nurses Week is "You Make a Difference," and what a difference nurses make. Today's nurses work in a wide range of specialties and settings, from school nurses who administer vaccines to highly specialized oncology nurses who assist in life-saving treatment decisions, and to home health care nurses for taking care of those who cannot leave their house because they're housebound for care. We want to thank all nurses, especially our nurses at Tahoe Forest, for the positive impact that they have on the community they serve. Nurses indeed make a difference, and we want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And those were our acknowledgements for this meeting. We'll move on to item 14, the consent calendar, and these are usually non-controversial reports or policies that have been reviewed by the stakeholders. But any board member can pull one of the items. Any of our staff can pull any of the items. So is there anything that anybody wants to pull?
Nope.
Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 15. And these are,
We should take a vote on,
I'm sorry, thank you. So could I have a motion to accept the consent calendar?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, then the consent calendar is approved as presented. Now we'll move on to item 15, which is the state of healthcare in California. And we have our COO, Louis Ward. I kind of, yeah, they were sitting too close together. So our CEO, Louis Ward, and then I'm going to get you right. I'm going to get you right this time. Our Chief Financial Officer, Crystal Felix. Okay, so go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Director Wong, Chair Wong, and Board of Directors. So Crystal and I actually had an opportunity to leave the hospital this past month and spend some time with colleagues from other hospitals throughout the state. And we actually attended different meetings on the same day, both in Sacramento. I attended the California Hospital Association's Rules Symposium, and Crystal attended the District Hospital Leadership Forum board meeting, correct?
Correct.
And it was an interesting time for us because we were able to learn from a number of different hospitals what they're currently going through. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the vulnerability with California hospitals at the moment. Crystal's going to talk about some upcoming and future challenges for us in terms of the Office of Healthcare Affordability. So I'm not going to read everything off of this slide, but I think I just want to point out some salient topics here. So California hospitals have had a tough go the last few years, and it's kind of resulted in where we're at today. Right now, we see roughly $12 billion in hospital losses after more than 2 years. So this really, a lot of this data comes from 2019, 2020, 21, 22. So a lot of the comparisons will be from 19 to fiscal year 22. 41%, go ahead.
Those operating losses specifically, do you know, or is that?
So operating losses, yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't include any investment loss.
At this point, they didn't go into the investment losses. This data is actually from January. This slide was pulled back up. And so before we saw a lot of the investment losses over the past 3-4 months. So this, I believe, is just straight up operational losses. So We've also seen a pretty significant increase in supplies, in pharmaceuticals, and in labor costs. I know Harry has shared many of these numbers. They differ based on what report you're looking at, but they're relatively within a couple of points of each other. So 41% pharmaceutical costs increase, of 19% in medical supply costs, increase of at least 16% in labor costs. I've seen that number as high as 20% in some areas as well. And I think one of the biggest numbers on this document really reflects the state's support here. So there has been zero state support. You might recall there was quite a bit of federal funding for COVID-related support. There was no state support, and I think that needs to be called out. There is quite a few cases throughout the state that hospitals have been dealing with many different types of challenges, but I think I'll call out that there is no one hospital that's immune to this. So we have represented here on this document rural hospitals, urban hospitals, district hospitals, and suburban hospitals. Madera Community Hospital unfortunately was forced to close its doors due to financial concerns they were dealing with. Hazel Hawkins actually filed for bankruptcy. San Diego County actually closed a number of their geriatric beds when Palomar Health closed 17 specialty beds. Visalia, this is Kauai Delta, which is the largest district hospital in the state. They unfortunately had to lay off 300 people. And of course, being the second biggest employer in the city, that had a drastic impact. And this is after they've actually made, a number of difficult decisions, like they stopped their match program to a retirement plan. They've put all capital spend on hold. So they've been dealing with a number of challenges down there. And then our neighbor to the north in Modoc Medical Center, a very rural community in Alturas, they've had to stop home health, the development of future investments in home health, hospice care, and geriatric programs. Geriatric being that they actually stopped the build of their skilled nursing facility that they were planned to actually build in the year of 2022. And I think before we move on to the next slide, I'll call out a couple of numbers that are really important here. Medi-Cal rates since 2012 have been frozen, essentially not a new dollar to the Medi-Cal program since 2012, as we've seen a increase in costs everywhere else in health system, in the health industry rather. We just have not seen any additional help from Medi-Cal. And if you look at that in terms of 2010 to 2020, there is a $46 billion shortfall currently with regards to, and this is an important point, what it costs us to deliver health care to that population versus what they have paid us to deliver health care to that population. So that is currently a very staggering high number of $46 billion. Moving on to the next slide. The only thing I'll point out here off of this slide, can I actually do that? Oh, need a little direction. Let's see here. Okay, thank you.
Can you read it?
That's why I have it right here. So I think what I'll call out here, there's a lot of duplication here on this, but what we really want to call out is more than 50% of hospitals in California are currently losing money every day caring for patients at the moment. So I believe the number is actually 52% have a negative operating margin at the moment. So in terms of risk of closure, right now they are saying that 1 in 5 hospitals, or 20% are experiencing unsustainable combination of negative margins, decreasing cash positions, and increasing debt loads. In 2022, 1 in 5 hospitals, sorry, 1 second. Gotta move my. Days cash on hand, clearly a very important metric that we would look at, fell sharply in 2022. So we saw about a 20% reduction in days cash on hand across the health system in California. This is continuing to get worse and worse day by day. So operating expenses, we've seen.
Can you just go back, what were
Yep.
the days, I can't follow up the number, how many days of operating cash do they have on average?
So I don't have a slide that shows the average days cash on hand for every hospital in the state of California. What they've done is essentially just looked at it and been able to quantify that it's about a 20% reduction. I think Crystal may have the number or some additional information there.
I don't have the actual number, but a couple things that are happening here is, one, obviously the operating margins are declining. They have losses. On top of that, a lot of hospitals did the Medicare Accelerated Payment Program, which was to infuse the health systems during COVID to assist during that time, but was required to pay that back. So not only did they have declining margins to the point of losses, their cash was now repaid back to the Medicare program. So those two things kind of started colliding at the same time, causing some pretty dramatic declines.
So moving on to operating expenses, clearly labor costs have went up pretty sharply. As we showed on a past slide, roughly 16% or $9.7 billion since 2019 to 2022. We have experienced sharp increases in labor costs here as well. Salaries accounted for roughly 81% of the total increase in labor expenses, so clearly you have benefits and taxes and so forth as well. In the 3 years combined following the start of the pandemic, the total salary expense has increased over $17 billion, while the benefit expense has increased by $3.6 billion. And so this is really important to us as we start looking at some current legislation that's there right now with SB 525, which would increase the health care minimum wage to $25 an hour, or salaried employees having to be double that of the health care minimum wage. So clearly that would exacerbate this to, I don't know if we've even quantified this yet, but we've quantified it here where it's at least a $10 million increase in salaries and benefits here at Tahoe Forest annually.
Ted Owens, Executive Director, Governance and Business Development. It's in the committee process. I think it moved, it's on the Senate side, it's moving on the Assembly side. And we've been talking about this with legislators for the last 2 days, where I don't have much of a voice. What Mr. Ward is referring to is the association of salaries tracking with the minimum wage. So you could potentially have a salaried individual at about $60,000 that could leapfrog to $100,000 because of the legislation. We live in an area where $25 an hour doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but if you're up where, and maybe Louis, you could address this in some of the real rural regions like Fall River Mills or Portola or Quincy, it's a much more dramatic death knell for them. So it's in the committee process. We worked it really hard. I think we'll know in about a week whether we were effective in maybe changing some minds, but we're asking, that it be killed. So.
And this is being sponsored by SEIU?
Yes, it's a labor bill.
Yeah. Thank you, Ted, for your work on that. And you characterize that perfectly right with the death knell comment, because it would clearly be probably the end of a number of very rural hospitals. So It's important work.
And skilled nursing facilities.
And yeah, actually, Harry did just mention skilled nursing facilities. This also would account for skilled nursing facilities that already have very thin operating margins the way it is. So moving on to labor costs, 22% increase in salary expenses compared 2019 to 2022. If you notice, one report says 16, this one's saying 22. I think it's just a different time period. This is the most recent Kaufman Hall report. So we can move on here to dependence of contract labor. I am delighted here that we don't use a ton of contract labor in terms of traveling nurses and so forth. So that's great here, but throughout the state of California, this is a really high cost of to deliver health care throughout the state, and that has increased over $3.8 billion since 2019. You probably heard many comments about rates being as high as $200 and $250 an hour throughout the pandemic. So that's what really kind of brought this $3.8 billion number up. And then drug expenses dramatically increasing. Drug expenses increased overall by roughly $700 million before pre-pandemic levels. So this is something that we are experiencing every day here. And purchase services, another large line item in any budget, is going to be $1.4 billion. Sorry, did you have a question?
Do you mind if we ask questions?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
We're looking at the cost of drugs. What about the availability of drugs? Have we run into many problems in that area?
That has gotten much better. In this past year, that has gotten much better, but we definitely had a number of months, probably even more than a year actually, probably 2020 to mid-2021, where we were having challenges getting certain drugs, certain tests, but supply chains have gotten better on pharmaceuticals. It's just become more costly.
Thank you.
And I think it was just about to finish up here. For California hospitals, expenses rose more than revenues in 2022 on a volume adjusted basis. So while revenues and expenses have increased relative to pre-pandemic levels, and it is important to note that revenues have went up, but expenses rose at a much faster level, leading to the decline in operating performance. Just the cost of delivering care for each patient that we see has just gone up and continues to rise. And so as we kind of go into the future, which Crystal is going to talk a bit more about, you can see that we're concerned about the Office of Healthcare Affordability and what it means to this hospital and hospitals throughout the state of California, just because we're coming from this playing field at this point.
Okay. So I had the pleasure of attending the District Hospital Leadership Forum Board meeting, and Ben Johnson, who is from the California Hospital Association, attended that meeting and gave a presentation on the Office of Healthcare Affordability, which we've been hearing about this, but we haven't seen some of the legs associated with it. And so during his presentation, we started to see the legs that were within exactly what they meant by the Office of Healthcare Affordability. So Ben did say we could share this with our board, so we felt it was going to be a good update. A lot of this information is going to be, like I said, pretty kind of high level because they still haven't spec'd out exactly what they mean by some of their language. So there's definitely going to be more to come. That's really tiny. So the state really wanted to assess what was going on with the residents of California and what are they concerned about. And the affordability of healthcare rose to the top, 63% in the survey, which is that top blue bar, basically, percent of California is very or somewhat worried about being able to afford the following items: unexpected medical bills, 63%. State policymakers over the years have been trying to address the cost of healthcare in a number of different ways. There's been some existing laws put into place and some policies that are trying to be considered or pushed, everything from rate regulation, market oversight, to even a single payer system. So lots of attempts over the years. So how did the Office of Healthcare Affordability come to fruition? There was definitely support from what they call the industry, so Blue Shield, commercial payer, and purchase of Business Group on Health, the labor unions, and consumer advocates. So this was originally proposed in AB 2817 by Wood. And because of COVID, it kind of trickled off. It got withdrawn. It got reintroduced as AB 1130, but ultimately wasn't approved. So how this got enacted was actually through the budget process in 2022, through Senate Bill 184, which also provided it funding. So it got enacted through the budget. There was a $32 million annual spend provided for it. Ramping up with starting with 142 staff and then ramping up over time from there. So it just really kind of snuck in through the budgetary process. So what are the objectives of the Office of Healthcare Affordability? So these were the items, if you go to the actual legislature writings, this is what they identified. So they want to increase transparency on cost and quality. They want to develop cost targets for healthcare, enforce compliance with those cost targets, monitor and review market transactions, and then establish new standards. They're talking about quality, equity, workforce in these areas. So that was the objective. So we'll kind of dive into this a little bit. So who does this apply to? So the healthcare entities that they actually incorporated into this applying to are supposed to be payers, providers, and fully integrated delivery systems, those such as Kaiser's that have a health plan, that sort of thing. What is not in here are physician organizations, dentists, pharmacy, including the manufacturers of pharmaceuticals as well as the retail pharmacies, durable medical equipment suppliers, home health agencies, and the emergency medical transportation system. So that is who is excluded at this time. However, they do state they could establish new standards for exempting additional providers from the cost targets and the reporting requirements, but that is yet to be determined. So one of their objectives that I stated to you was to improve transparency. And what they're really talking about here is basically making it transparent what the total healthcare expenditures are. Now, when we talk about healthcare expenditures or expenses or cost, I think about our costs as a health system, right? Salaries and wages, pharmaceuticals, all that sort of thing. What they're talking about when they're mentioning expenditures or cost is the cost to the patient. So what are they paying in premiums? What are they paying in co-pays and deductibles? What is the impact on the patient? So when they're talking about expenditures, that's what they're talking about. So they're going to track each healthcare entity that's subject to this based upon the claims. They're going to get this data from the health plans. They're also talking about getting it from the Healthcare Payment Data Program, which actually isn't even in effect yet. This is slated to go into effect in July of 2023, and I don't believe that's going to kick off in a timely manner. What they're trying to say here is that this really is, for us, revenue. For the patient, it's cost. So that's what they're talking about. And they're trying, in their language, they're saying they're trying not to make this a burden on the healthcare system by using existing sources of data that's already out there. They're going to require annual reports on healthcare spending. So they're going to report out the total cost. Now keep in mind what cost means. Total cost per capita. And they have not defined exactly what that is yet. So right now, the cost per capita will be based upon the state as a whole, but they also intend to break that down into service category, geographical region, or even where the source of funds came from. So that could be Tahoe Forest Hospital, that could be Placer or Nevada County, that could be Northern California. This just is not defined yet. So we have no idea what they truly mean by what is making up the per capita region. So that's where there's more work for them to do on that. They're also going to report out on what they believe is recommendations and best practices to control cost, improve quality and equity, progress on entities meeting cost targets and other goals they establish, what the drivers of cost growth are, the performance of access, quality, and equity, and enforcement actions. So their first annual report is supposed to come out in June of 2027, reflecting what they're calling as spending for 2024 and 2025. So this is right on the horizon. Their second objective is to establish cost targets. So again, when they talk about cost targets, they're talking about revenue for us. So they are talking about establishing for us revenue targets based on annual growth per capita. So this is growth in our revenue. So they will establish what we're allowed to grow our revenues by. And then if we exceed those growth targets, there is potential for penalties. So this, they're saying, is to promote the affordability and predictability to the patient of which is coming to the individual as costs. They do say they're going to consider inflation and population-based measures like aging if you have a higher aging population. They do want you to maintain quality, equity, and workforce stability, and we'll talk about what those are. And that the office is going to actually analyze payers' costs, their cost targets for providers expected to be based on revenues. So the information is basically going to be known to the payers as well. So they're going to know what our targets are and what our ability to move is, which kind of limits your ability to negotiate with payers in the future because they already know what your targets are. So facilities like Coia Delta, who are 85% Medicare and Medi-Cal, which we already know that reimbursement is not changing, their only ability to cover additional costs that Medicare and Medi-Cal don't cover is to use commercial insurance plans. Well, their ability to negotiate just got taken off the table. So it's a little concerning, kind of the focus of where they're going on with this. I think there's good intentions here about trying to limit the cost for our patients, but I'm a little concerned about the approach that is being taken here. So in 2025, we are going to have non-enforceable cost targets. So we're going to have that put forth. By 2026, we're going to have a statewide target. So the California will have its growth target that we're allowed to do. By 2027, we're now going to be broken down into sectors. So this is where we might see a cost target for Tahoe Forest or a cost target for Placer County or however they define it. And then by 2029, the whole thing's enforceable. So in 2026, the statewide target's enforceable. So if we're not meeting that target or if we're exceeding that target, we could be penalized. By 2029, not only will we have the state target, but we'll have our designated sector targets that we're going to have to adhere to. And if we exceed those, we could be fined financially. There's kind of a list of what they're going through for enforcement, which could be plans of correction. They say they would be discussion if we had unusual reasons for needing additional increases above the cost targets. So right now, they're saying it would be a more engaged conversation of why we exceeded the cost target. But like I said, this is not really well defined at this time.
Can you just help me with an example of cost target? I mean, is that down to, I mean, are we talking like billing code type, like cost per procedure, or like?
Per capita, cost per head.
Oh, so our total costs or revenue?
Our
Cost to
revenue.
them, okay, I got you.
Per capita, however they define per capita,
Yeah.
which we don't know yet.
Okay.
Okay. So I think I kind of already talked to you about the enforcement piece, that this agency does have teeth. So it has been built in that they are as part of their progress is to enforce these rules and hold organizations accountable. So you can see where pre-enforcement is, hey, you've exceeded your cost target, we notified you, respond, justifying why you have more growth than we said you could have, kind of nice, play nice with you. As we move forward with progressive enforcement, that's where, public testimony, performance improvement plans, and financial penalties kick in. The other area that they've been chartered with is market oversight. And what they're talking about here is consolidations. So like if two health plans in a region suddenly merged and they became one, and really they're the only one in the region, they have market dominance, and patients don't necessarily have the option to go someplace else. So what they're doing here is foreseeing a notification period of any type of intent to transact. So we would have to notify 90 days in advance of any type of transaction where we might merge or change the market dynamics significantly. What I don't know here is there's some additional legislature out there that is talking about allowing district hospitals to employ physicians, which currently they can't do. What I'm not sure about is if a majority of physicians suddenly join an employment model with a hospital, is that considered a market transaction, and will that trigger their oversight of that type of transaction? So, but they're going to be watching significant mergers, acquisitions, things of that nature, to make sure that doesn't create like a dominance in the market where then, I think their thought process is, well, since they've merged, there's only one person, we can jack up our charges, and this is to help mitigate the ability to do that.
Excuse me, do you anticipate that they would have the right to interfere with such a merger or to negate
I'm
it?
not seeing interference. This is more about transparency. So this is where they're wanting you to notify them about the transaction. Part of the first thing we talked about is their annual reports on transparency. And so that would include market mergers and things of that nature. I don't think they can stop the transaction, but they certainly want to put it out there publicly.
The state does have a demonstrated history of imposing terms and conditions on facilities that are coming together, even when a facility is in dire straits that were so onerous, and Madera would be an example, and I could go through many others in the past where the friendly partner that was trying to help, backed away because they couldn't meet the conditions. So this notice period and the prior behavior, certainly not lessening the difficulty.
So the next area is that their objective is to establish new healthcare standards. So one of those areas is around quality and equity. So they want a single set of measures across payers and providers that could be reported on annually. They want it aligned with other state agencies of things we're probably already doing. So this is, again, a transparency issue. Workforce stability. This one's really interesting. So here they're talking about the implications of the cost target setting And how does that impact the workforce? So if we're limited on our cost targets of what we can increase our charges by, what they don't want to have happen is have that impact the workforce. So what they're talking about here is they're saying that the intent of this, so the effects of the cost targets on healthcare, they want to make sure it still creates workforce stability, creating high-quality jobs, training of healthcare workers, and making sure that employees that are non-supervisory aren't continuing to or aren't operating outside their scope of what they should be doing. They want to monitor that, make sure that there's still competitive wages and benefits for the frontline healthcare workers, and that professional judgment of health professionals acting within their scope of practice is not impeded. They want to monitor the workforce to make sure we don't have workforce shortages that undermine healthcare affordability, access, quality, equity, and cultural and linguistic competent care. So what they've put in here is that they still want to make sure we have adequate workforce, that we have quality workforce, and they're paid appropriately still from a wage and benefit perspective. Okay? Alternative payment methodology adoption. This is really trying to move us to what we've been hearing about for years. So moving us away for fee-for-service, where we get a payment per service that we provide, to incentivizing care and trying to, in essence, keep patients out of the hospital. So it gets back to like the ACOs, capitation, where you're given one payment to care for the patient. They're really trying to push moving to the adoption of something other than fee-for-service in reimbursement.
The Kaiser model?
Probably.
Yeah.
They're really weighing heavily on what was done in Massachusetts. And so they're really leveraging, I guess, lessons learned or how they implemented there. But that is definitely a different dynamic there. They moved to basically a single payer model a long time ago, although they still allow commercial to operate in that vicinity, which provides a completely different ability to make change than what California is faced with today.
Well, and just one last comment there. Massachusetts had a history of actually paying providers fairly, whereas Medi-Cal has completely opposite history of the last 10 years not seeing any kind of increase. So that's where things get a bit more concerning with regards to the state taking a larger role here.
And then the last piece is they really want to concentrate on primary care and behavioral health spending benchmarks. That's pretty critical for them to look at, measure, report, standards. I really don't know what they mean by that, and the language is quite vague. So there will definitely be more to come on that as well.
So how do you, if you have commercial insurance, how do you have a single payer? I don't quite understand that.
So if you don't want to fall under the single payer system and you want to still pay for your own commercial insurance, the facilities there will still accept your commercial insurance, but a majority of the population will be under the single payer. Okay, so who's running the show for the Office of Healthcare Affordability? They have appointed a director of the office. They have a board that they're appointing, and they have an advisory committee. Now, ironically, the board is made up of an interesting composition. So it's an 8-member board. 4 members shall be appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. 1 member shall be appointed by the Senate Committee on Rules. 1 member shall be appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly. The Secretary of Health and Human Services will serve as a board member or their designee, and the CalPERS Chief Health Director or deputy shall serve as a non-voting member of the board. They have 4-year terms. The Senate Committee on Rules, whoever they appoint, has a 5-year term. The Speaker of the Assembly will be a 2-year term, and one of the initial appointments by the governor will be a 3-year term. Each person appointed has to demonstrate knowledge or expertise in at least one of the areas: healthcare economics, healthcare delivery, healthcare management, healthcare finance and admin, payment methodologies, health plan administration, and healthcare technology. However, not a single member of that board can be compensated in any way by a healthcare entity, payer, et cetera. So there is no hospital representation on this board at all. There is speculation, though, that if you're receiving a pension through, so there's still some speculation on that. And they've already appointed the board. So the board is Dr. Richard Pan, who was a former senator, Ian Lewis, Director of Research, Sandra Hernandez. You can see the list here, and none of them, there's a lack of academic on here. There's a few that CHA feels strongly understands healthcare quite well and will actually be a benefit for us. But there's a few that they're not sure exactly how it's going to play out with them as board members. The advisory committee is just that, they advise. And folks can actually could have submitted applications. They were all due by April 15th. Their job is to advise the board, but they have no voting rights. This is where healthcare members can participate. So CEOs, CFOs, payers, whatever, they could all participate on the advisory committee, but they have no voting power. So here are the implementation timelines. So July of 2022, the office started its process. April of 2024, this is where they're going to require, if there's market transactions, you have to provide notification. January through December of 2025 is when they're going to start establishing the statewide cost targets that are not enforceable. So then in June of 2025, they're going to create what they consider a baseline report to measure us. And it's going to be based on spending in 22 and 23. And again, spending is revenue. January through December of 2026, this is where they're going to start enforcing the statewide cost target. So, that's LA, San Francisco, that's Fall River. I mean, we're all combined into one statewide target. It doesn't matter what we are. And then in June of 2027, they're supposed to issue their first annual report, that transparency report we talked about in the beginning. And then by October of 2027, they will have defined what their sectors are and then what our specific cost per capita for Tahoe Forest would actually be. And again, it could be the county, it could be Northern California, whatever they define the sector to be. And then starting in January of 2029 through that year, this is where they're going to start enforcing the statewide and sector targets, both. So we've got an interesting road ahead of us. Basically, these were the key takeaways that CHA outlined for us. That's the end of the presentation. So the concern here, I'm glad we had Louie go first, because as you heard about the increase in labor costs, the increase in our pharmaceutical costs, our increase in medical supplies, all exceeding, double-digit numbers. If you look at the fourth bullet point down, cost targets potentially will be based on economic indicators. They're thinking the state is going to target the increases to our cost per capita to about 2.8 to 3.5% per year. So that's going to be, in essence, our limitation on what we can do with our revenues, that we then have to somehow absorb what our actual costs are going to be when we're faced with some unfunded mandates from the state, minimum wage requirements, pharmaceuticals not being part of this. The only thing they're going to do is monitor pharmaceuticals. So we could continue to see inflation in our pharmaceuticals and our medical supply costs. So if we choose to exceed the targets we're given, then we have a different road to go down. So, like I said, I think their intentions probably were good on behalf of the patients, but I think it's pretty unrealistic for the model that they created with the things we are facing.
Yeah, like with all government, sometimes it's hard to see that one group is talking to the other group because they have completely different outlooks. A good example would be you have the Office of Healthcare Affordability, but then you have a Senate Bill 525 that increases the cost of healthcare through increased salaries. Or you have our unfunded seismic mandate that's going to explode in terms of new costs for brick and mortar buildings in California. So it's just we're kind of navigating and exploring just a new way that the state is coming together to try and manage the cost of healthcare, because clearly, I think right now federally, healthcare is 20% of the GDP. So, I think everybody sees this as an issue. It's just we have to really pick a lane here. And if we want to reduce the cost of healthcare, then we have to reduce some of the unfunded burdens like minimum wage and seismic. So those are the two big ones I can think of right now. But, over the next 7 years, I'm sure we'll see additional efforts to increase the cost of healthcare through unfunded mandates.
So, Crystal, Harry has lamented on many occasions that 20% of dollars, healthcare dollars, never touch the patient. Does any of this address that issue?
So I was pretty vocal at this meeting. I was pretty upset that the concentration seemed to be on the revenues. And my frustration was, if you look at the industry, who is making the greatest profit? It is the health plans and it's the pharmaceutical companies, right? Yet, there really isn't the focus in that area. They're talking about the cost to the patient. Well, the health plans have very expensive, high deductible plans that are causing the patients to have a significant out-of-pocket cost. And, by shifting that burden to the patient, the insurance companies are keeping those premium payments, and they're not necessarily getting paid out to the healthcare systems that are providing the care. So there's a lot of holes in this that aren't getting plugged, that are all part of the overall problem with healthcare. And it's not just hospitals and providers. It stems across the board. And the gentleman who did this presentation said, I'm like, why are they not addressing the pharmaceutical area? And the comment was the state didn't feel they had the oversight to be able to demand changes within the pharmaceutical region. So therefore, it was more of tracking the cost instead of addressing the costs. And so that's why they just didn't feel like they had jurisdiction over that.
And the insurance question?
Well, he's with CHA. He didn't have the answers. And honestly, I've read through the entire language, and, it really doesn't sound like it addresses the health plans. So we're going to, once again, kind of bear the burden of what I think is coming down.
We do have to sort of make a closure on this, or maybe a discussion for another time, because we need to go into closed session with someone who can only be with us till 8 o'clock. And again, this was for information.
Yes, this is the beginnings. I'm sure as it evolves more, you'll be hearing more from me. I'm hoping there's more focus on the payers as well as what's already the focus on us.
I think just one last comment, it really speaks to the importance of having Ted down in Sacramento and us attending as often as we can, local meetings, because a lot's going to change in healthcare, and just having a voice is really, really important.
Well, I'll tell you, just about the entire room at the District Hospital Leadership Forum, anyone that was close to retirement made a comment, it's time to retire.
Yeah.
So I was like, you can't leave me.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for attending, and we certainly are supportive that you are attending these and representing the healthcare at Cabo Forest and for our region. For our legal counsel and that, we have someone in closed session that can only be with us until 8 o'clock, and that's Catherine from the company. How should we handle that? Should we go to close now, have her drop in and come back to open, because we have, oh, okay. Okay, so we won't go, okay, we won't go, okay. So the letter to Friends of the Library, we've been in a discussion with them right along. They presented the plan that they have for improving building and building to us, I think, 2 years ago. And what they're asking, a lot of the nonprofits and other organizations throughout the town is to write a letter of support. And this will help them find funding, get grants. And so Ted and I went to a focus group that they had, and certainly we are supportive of it. But I bring it to the board because I'm going to have all of you sign your names to it, to really support what the Friends of the Library are doing.
Yeah, just, I would say staff strongly recommend this program, and so we would encourage our board to consider signing on to this important community resource. So I want you to know our team is behind this.
All the reasons why, and they certainly are very valid in this area. Library.
I'll second, Michael.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to approve and send the letter.
No, we will, if you want to move into close now, are we just going to skip over the board committee reports and just go straight to closed session? Okay. So the board at this point.
Before we do,
Mhm.
I've got one important committee item to just let the board
Real quick.
know. Okay. Over the 9 years I've been on the board, we have occasionally sought the services of a financial consultant, Gary Hicks, ostensibly to assist us in lowering the borrowing costs for the Measure C bonds. But when the Silicon Valley Bank closed, both Mary Brown and I felt that it was our fiduciary responsibility to raise the question of how firm is our U.S. bank, where we have significant funds, and just raise the question. And so we sought the advice of Gary. He advised us, just to make it short, I could give you all the detail, but the bank is in good shape. We should rest assured. He also commented and gave us an update on Chandler. He felt they're very strong. And so the bottom line is our money's in good hands.
Okay. All right then, David.
Yeah, the board is going to recess to closed session regarding conference with legal counsel, initiation of litigation, one potential case. So at this point, I would ask, there's no public comment, then we can recess to close.
Okay.
Okay, so we're moving into closed session, and we
Wait
need
for the
to
guy to
turn
turn
that off.
Yep.